So I'm here to introduce Fatima, who's sitting here right next to me. And it's an honor and a pleasure. And there's so many things when we spoke that we have in common. Fatima is from Libya, and my father spent his whole life actually working in Libya, so I was so honored to actually have this opportunity. Libya is a country that's currently in crisis. It's been affected by a lack of good governance, by an uprising that didn't really turn out the way people hoped. And now, unfortunately, ISIS has declared a chapter or a branch, a franchise that's also operating in Libya, and it's causing a lot of problems with governance in the country. It's heartbreaking to see what's happening in that country, and Fatima is going to speak a bit about some of the challenges. Fatima graduated in media comms from Webster University in Vienna, where I believe we met once before. She reminded me, unfortunately, I didn't remember, but I was embarrassed when she said that. But actually, also then studied postgraduate studies at SOAS, which is where I went, so that was cool. And works in international development. Her dissertation was in social media movements and women's empowerment, and looking at the way in which social media was used during the Arab uprisings to organize and galvanize young people. And really interestingly, in 2011, Fatima was working advising the EU on an impending refugee crisis. I asked her if anyone took her advice and listened to her, and she said, well, you see what's going on around you? Obviously they didn't. But that was actually 4 years ahead of the current refugee crisis. So in that sense, Fatima was a visionary. She saw that there was a refugee crisis brewing and attempted to do something with the EU to stem it at source and to start dealing with some of the problems at source that lead to people leaving their homes and migrating and becoming refugees. One of Fatima's main passions is freedom of speech. As somebody interested in journalism and media, she wants to talk to us today about some of the challenges that people like journalists face in attempting to have the sorts of conversations that I was saying are so necessary. So without further ado, Fatima, please. It's an honor. Thank you.
Hi. When the Arab Spring began in 2011, I didn't anticipate where Libya would be today. The question guiding us back then was, where's my voice? Where's my vote? Our generation demanded the right to engage in the making of our own future. This optimism we had 4 years ago is fading with every attack against us and our freedom of opinion. The Libya of today is deeply divided. We have two governments at two sides of the country, both claiming to represent us, but at the same time, neither has a valid mandate. For over a year now, they've tried to come to a solution and failed. In 2011, everyone had something to say. By July, we had over 120 new newspapers and magazines. But too many voices were confronted with too many weapons, and the ones with the most weapons were the ones that had their seat at the negotiating table. Journalists and bloggers have been hit hardest by this intolerance. Since the end of the uprising, there have been dozens of murders, over 30 documented cases of abductions, and over 120 physical attacks targeting journalists. I've worked closely with journalists to call out those countering our words with violence. We've campaigned together with policymakers and academia to advocate for reforming the laws that limit our freedom of speech. We've issued statements to condemn and monitor these attacks, but to avoid conflict, it's not just those in power we need to persuade. Mentalities need to change at the grassroots level, starting with the home. Our generation has proven that we don't just have the ideas, but we've mastered the communication tools at our disposal, in our homes, in our schools, and in our pockets. By creating platforms online, we've informed and engaged each other in the making of our own future. The voices we raise are not for extremism. They're not trying to tear our country apart. The voices we raise are trying to call for political and social rights for our country. 18-year-old blogger and activist Tawfiq bin Saud was one of these voices. He had been campaigning for our civil and social rights since he was 15, and he was calling out against rising extremism in our country. One of his campaigns was simple. He wanted car owners to put license plates back on their cars and remove their tinted windows so you could identify kidnappers. Tawfiq was killed last year in Benghazi with his friend and another activist, Samil Kwafi. Now, he believed that force alone couldn't resolve the conflict, that there had to be a civil movement working in parallel to the military one. As a first step, we need to raise awareness in local communities and promote dialogue. I've used the tools at my disposal through the social media and through online platforms to advocate for freedom of opinion and the press. Others from our generation are continuing to engage with civil society, particularly with women, to encourage them to participate in public forums and in elections. Our advocacy is being picked up by the media, ensuring that our voices are not lost. When a journalist is attacked, it's not just one less voice, but dozens are silenced. Attacking freedom of opinion destroys any chance we have for a real inclusive national dialogue. Our dialogue must be social. It needs to be inclusive. We must make it personal. By talking about social issues and encouraging each other, we can make it that way. Political intolerance leads to acts of violence against individuals like Tawfiq and against communities like we've seen in Beirut and in Paris. One young world, don't forget about Libya or any other country where people are putting their lives on the line. My hope is that Libyan society will once again take part in political discussion. Remember this and continue to support us and our different opinions against those trying to attack them. Lobby your governments, lobby the international community so that our dialogue remains inclusive and that we know who is taking part in the discussions and what is being discussed. We need to bring our voices back to the table. Thank you.